The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every inch of standing room occupied, and the air thick with the sharp scent of anxiety, coffee, and polished wood. In the center of it all, 10-year-old Maddie Holt tugged at the straps of her small backpack, her legs swinging nervously beneath the witness stand. She had never been in a place like this. Never had she imagined that her quiet life, days of school, homework, and playing with her dog in the backyard, would lead her here, under the harsh fluorescent lights, in the middle of a case that had divided her small Colorado town like a fault line. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at the reporters whose cameras glinted like tiny suns. She didn't even glance at the intimidating rows of attorneys, their faces carved into lines of professionalism and suspicion. Instead, her gaze was fixed on Ranger, the police K-9. The German Shepherd was massive, his fur a blend of black and brown that shimmered under the fluorescent lights. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, scanning the courtroom with a cautious precision that made every adult shiver in their seats. Ranger had been at countless crime scenes. He had been in riots, chase scenes, and the darkest alleys of the city. He was trained to obey commands without question, but there was something different about tonight, something in the air that even the seasoned officers and the judge could feel. Ranger's tail, usually a controlled, slow-moving instrument of discipline, twitched ever so slightly. His ears, erect and alert, followed Maddie with an intensity that seemed almost human. And when the handler, Officer Trent Dawkins, attempted to tighten his grip on the leash, Ranger stiffened. His jaw tensed. His gaze did not leave the girl. The murmur in the courtroom grew. The whispers bounced off the wooden panels, mingling with the metallic click of cameras and the occasional shuffle of a foot. Reporters whispered into microphones, their voices sharp, urgent. 10-year-old witness claims she saw the incident. Ranger remembers. The words floated through the air, but Maddie didn't hear them. She only heard the soft growl that seemed to emanate from Ranger's chest, a sound so low, so deliberate, it felt like the room itself had exhaled. Her mother, sitting stiffly in the front row, tugged at her sleeve. "Maddie, honey, are you sure you want to do this?" she whispered, her voice quivering despite her attempt at calm. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the judge and the crowd, as if the room itself were a living, breathing predator, ready to pounce on a child brave enough to speak the truth. Maddie's small hand rose slowly and covered her mother. She shook her head once firmly. "Yes, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a weight no one expected from someone so small. "I have to." The judge, a man in his 60s with graying hair and an ever-present frown etched into his forehead, leaned forward. "Very well," he said, his gavel momentarily forgotten. "Miss Holt, you may proceed. But remember, this is a serious court of law. You are under oath. Speak truthfully." Maddie nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of the bench. She took a deep breath, a shaky inhale that somehow seemed to calm her rather than frighten her. Then, slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward. Each movement drew the eyes of everyone in the room, from the anxious parents in the gallery to the skeptical attorneys, to the officers who had spent decades commanding obedience from men and animals alike. All attention centered on a girl smaller than most of the courtroom chairs, yet moving with a determination that made the hairs on the back of necks stand up. She stopped a few feet from Ranger. The dog sat rigid, ears forward, tail still, his head slightly cocked as if listening to her heart. Maddie tilted her head and whispered, "I know what you're trying to tell them." The words were soft, almost lost in the hum of air conditioning, yet they landed like a thunderclap. Ranger's ears twitched. His low growl intensified, vibrating through the polished floorboards. Officer Dawkins' face, usually composed and unreadable, shifted in the briefest flicker of unease. He tightened his grip on Ranger's leash, a futile attempt to reassert control, but even he could feel the dog's resistance, the tension coiling like a spring under fur and muscle. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. The whispers stopped, the gallery stilled. Even the judge, with decades of experience in law and criminal procedure, leaned forward in his chair, eyes narrowing. What was happening? Maddie's gaze held Ranger. She spoke again, slightly louder this time. "You're not just a police dog. You saw what happened. You tried to stop it." The growl shifted into a low, mournful whine. Ranger's massive head tilted, and for a heartbeat it seemed as though the dog's eyes communicated a story too profound to be put into words. Something inside the courtroom shifted. The air felt heavier, charged, electric, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting for the next revelation. A reporter whispered into a microphone, barely audible, "Is she talking to the dog?" "Yes," another reporter muttered, barely moving his lips. She's communicating with him." The gallery erupted in murmurs and mutters. Some adults frowned in disbelief. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, captivated by the impossible scene unfolding before them. Maddie, small and trembling, stood as if she were not a child but a conduit for truth that no grown-up could articulate. Then something unprecedented happened. Ranger, the disciplined, trained, and fearless police K9, slowly lowered his head until his massive muzzle was nearly level with Maddie's chest. His growl softened, replaced by a series of quiet, deliberate whines. The sound resonated through the courtroom, like a language no one else understood. The officers shifted uneasily in their seats, whispers of confusion and fear rippling through them. Maddie's lips moved again. "They don't understand, Ranger, but I do. You were trying to protect everyone, including him." Officer Dawkins' hand tightened around the leash. His jaw tensed. He had trained Ranger himself. He had spent years teaching him obedience, loyalty, discipline. And yet now, nothing he could do seemed to stop the dog from leaning slightly closer to the child, from responding in ways that defied every protocol he had instilled. The judge's gavel thudded, almost unnoticed, against the wooden bench. "Miss Holt, are you sure?" "Yes, Your Honor," Maddie interrupted, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "I saw everything that night. I know what happened, and Ranger knows too." A hush fell over the room. The tension was palpable, as if the air itself had been stretched thin. Every person present felt it, the sense that they were witnessing something monumental, something that would be remembered long after the walls of this small-town courthouse crumbled into memory. Ranger whined again, softly this time, and then, unexpectedly, he stood. His movement was deliberate, controlled, and terrifying in its intent. The crowd gasped. Maddie took a half step back but did not retreat. Instead, she reached out her hand, not in fear but in acknowledgement. "You can tell them now," she whispered. The dog's eyes seemed to gleam with intelligence beyond measure. And in that instant the courtroom knew. The trial was about to change forever. The courtroom had gone quiet, but the tension did not dissipate. Maddie Holt's words hung in the air like smoke, curling into the corners, seeping into every witness, officer, and reporter present. Outside the courtroom, the small Colorado town of Reed Ridge was buzzing with anticipation, like an electric storm about to break. Inside, the storm had already arrived, and no one could predict where it would strike next. Reed Ridge was a town that prided itself on its order, its police, its sense of community. But for months now, the trial of Officer Trent Dawkins had split it down the middle. Local headlines screamed accusations of brutality, while social media blew the story apart in 24-hour cycles of outrage and conjecture. Some called Maddie's testimony heroic, others dangerous, a child meddling in adult affairs. Either way, everyone agreed on one thing. The story was larger than any of them, and it wasn't finished. Maddie's mother, Corinne Holt, shifted in her seat, hands twisting the hem of her cardigan until the fabric threatened to tear. She had been reluctant to bring Maddie into the trial, terrified that the child would be consumed by the weight of it all. Yet here she was, watching her daughter confront a highly trained police dog with a courage that felt unnatural, almost cinematic. "Mom," Maddie whispered, barely audible, "he's trying to tell them what happened. I can help him." Corinne swallowed hard. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Maddie, you're brave, but don't get too close." Her words were cut off as Officer Dawkins moved slightly, attempting to regain control over Ranger. The officer's jaw was tight. His uniform looked crisp, yet his hands betrayed him, trembling ever so slightly as he gripped the leash. Ranger had never disobeyed him, never challenged his authority. And yet the dog now stood unwavering, seemingly attuned to Maddie's voice rather than Dawkins'. From the back of the courtroom, whispers rose. What is she doing? How is a 10-year-old controlling a police dog? The defense attorney, Martin Raines, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, his fingers tapping nervously on his briefcase. Your Honor, he began, I must protest. This is unprecedented. A child cannot be allowed to interact with an active K-9 during testimony. It is. The judge, a man known for his patience and precision, raised his hand. Sit down, Mr. Raines. Miss Holt has been sworn in. If she wishes to speak, she will be allowed to do so. His eyes narrowed slightly at the officer. And Officer Dawkins, I suggest you refrain from interference. Dawkins' face tightened. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but nothing came out. Ranger's low growl punctuated the silence, a warning more potent than any human voice. Maddie took a deep breath, then stepped closer to Ranger. Her small hand reached out, not with fear but with certainty. You were scared that night, weren't you? She asked softly. You tried to stop him, didn't you? The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. A flicker of movement in Ranger's eyes. The dog leaned forward slightly, and his growl softened. The gallery was filled with parents, reporters, and townspeople, all watching, some with tears brimming in their eyes. A 10-year-old girl was standing up to a trained police officer and a formidable K-9, and somehow she was being heard. Outside, the town was reacting too. Social media lit up. Maddie vs. Ranger was trending within minutes. The local news cut to live feeds from the courthouse steps. People crowded outside the building, peering through windows, cameras raised, hopping for a glimpse of the unfolding drama. The town was divided not just by the case, but by the improbable heroics of one small girl who dared to speak truth to power. Back inside, Maddie's voice trembled slightly, but her resolve did not waver. I saw him, the officer. He raised his hand. Ranger barked, trying to stop him. I know he did. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The prosecutor, Linda Carrington, adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. She had prepared for months, rehearsed every scenario, every line of questioning. But nothing in her experience, nothing in her meticulous files, had prepared her for a child speaking with the authority of someone who had lived through the events herself. Miss Holt, Carrington began cautiously, can you tell the court exactly what you saw? Maddie nodded, swallowing hard. I was hiding behind the vending machines at the gas station. I didn't want anyone to see me. I heard them arguing. I saw the officer swing his arm at the boy and Ranger. Ranger jumped in front of him. He tried to stop him from hitting anyone. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The defense attorney banged his briefcase lightly against the bench. Objection. Hearsay. This is. The judge raised a hand. Objection overruled. She is a witness. Continue, Miss Holt. Maddie's hands trembled slightly, but she held Ranger's gaze. Ranger barked at him, and he didn't stop. Ranger kept trying to pull him back. I've never seen a dog act like that before, and I've known Ranger since he was a pup. He's never been afraid of anything. The gallery leaned forward in unison. The murmurs escalated. Some gasped audibly, others exchanged glances of disbelief. No one could deny the intensity in Maddie's eyes, the authenticity in her tone. Outside the courtroom, people were taking to their phones. The girl is telling the truth, one tweet read. Ranger is scared. Justice for Ranger. Another post shared a video of Maddie on the stand, the caption, 10-year-old girl versus trained police dog. You can't make this up. Corinne Holt pressed her hand to her mouth. She wanted to cheer, to cry, to shake everyone in the room and say, my daughter is telling the truth. Yet she stayed silent, knowing that her child's courage was enough. Officer Dawkins shifted in his seat, his face pale. He had trained Ranger himself. He had spent years instilling discipline, loyalty, obedience, and now everything he believed in seemed to unravel before his eyes. He gripped the leash tighter, but Ranger did not flinch. The dog's gaze remained locked on Maddie, attentive, almost reverent. Maddie took another deep breath. I know what happened. I know Ranger tried to protect everyone, even the officer. He deserves to be heard. A stunned hush swept the room. Even the reporters paused their frantic typing. Even the judge leaned back, processing the magnitude of what was happening. A 10-year-old girl had not only survived the chaos of a traumatic event, but had also captured the attention and trust of a creature trained to obey only authority. Then Ranger did something no one expected. Slowly, deliberately, he moved closer to Maddie, his massive head lowering almost to the level of her shoulders. He rested one paw lightly against the floor, his weight still restrained by Dawkins, but the intent unmistakable. He was aligning himself with her, not his handler. The gallery gasped again. Some whispered of miracles. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But every eye was fixed on the girl and the dog, on the unspoken communication between them, on the silent language of loyalty, fear, and courage. The judge slammed his gavel, breaking the tension momentarily. Order, all rise. Maddie didn't move. She only whispered, "It's okay, you can tell them now." Ranger's ears twitched, his growls subsided, and for the first time in the entire trial there was an undeniable shift. The child had not only confronted the dog, she had earned his trust, his attention, and, somehow, the truth. Outside, the town felt the shift too. People paused, cell phones lowered. Something had changed inside that courtroom, something beyond law, beyond authority, beyond fear. A child and a dog had aligned to expose a truth no adult could suppress. And as Maddie stood there, small but unyielding, the courtroom and the town both knew. This trial was no longer just about an officer, a dog, or a late-night incident. It was about courage, loyalty, and the startling power of someone who refused to stay silent. The tension was electric, the moment fragile, and no one could guess what Maddie and Ranger would reveal next. The courtroom had transformed into a place that felt less like a legal arena and more like the center of a storm. Every head in the room was turned toward the small girl standing in front of the police K9. Maddie Holt's gaze did not waver. Ranger's massive brown eyes were locked on hers, the quiet intelligence in them radiating through the tension-filled air. The audience, the reporters, and even Officer Dawkins could feel it. Something unspoken yet undeniable was passing between the child and the dog. Maddie took a step closer, her small hand extended, palm open, a silent invitation. Ranger lowered his head slightly, his ears twitching. The growl that had rumbled through the courtroom moments earlier had softened to a low, almost inaudible whine. Even the judge leaned forward in his chair, gripping the arms of the bench. Years of courtroom experience had taught him that evidence could change a trial, but he had never seen anything like this. The gallery whispered in astonishment, She's communicating with him." "It's impossible," muttered one of the reporters. But the impossibility only heightened the drama. Every eye in the room was riveted on the two of them, waiting for the first crack in the tension, or for something truly extraordinary to happen. Maddie's voice was soft but clear. "I know you were scared that night. You didn't want anyone to get hurt. You tried to stop him, didn't you?" Ranger tilted his head as though weighing her words. His paw shifted slightly, pressing against the polished floorboards. Officer Dawkins tensed, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the leash, his jaw locked in a hard line. The dog had never defied him before. Never. Maddie knelt slowly, bringing herself closer to Ranger's level. The child's eyes were wide, unafraid. "I'm not scared," she whispered. "I know what you're saying." At that moment, Ranger did something no one expected. He leaned forward, pressing his massive head gently against Maddie's shoulder. The courtroom gasped, some instinctively recoiling from the sheer size and strength of the dog. But Maddie didn't flinch. She wrapped her small arms around his neck, her fingers buried in his fur. The connection was silent, profound, almost reverent. Karen Holt, sitting in the front row, pressed her hands together, holding back tears. She had raised her daughter to be courageous, yes, but even she hadn't anticipated this moment. Maddie was not just confronting a police dog, she was understanding him in a way that no adult in that room could. The prosecutor, Linda Carrington, leaned forward, her notebook momentarily forgotten. "Miss Holt, explain to the court what you see in Ranger." Maddie straightened slightly, her small frame trembling but resolute. "He's not angry, he's afraid and confused. He tried to stop the officer from hurting someone. He tried to protect everyone, even him." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, disbelief, and awe. People leaned forward, craning their necks to see the child and the dog. Some reporters whispered to each other, barely able to contain their shock. "This is incredible." "Unbelievable," muttered another, shaking his head. Officer Dawkins shifted uncomfortably. His voice, usually commanding and unwavering, faltered slightly. That's nonsense. Ranger is trained to obey commands. He-ka." Ranger's low growl interrupted him. It wasn't aggressive toward anyone, not Maddie, not the judge, not the gallery. It was directed at Dawkins. A warning. A reminder that control had shifted and this child held something in her hands that no training could undo. Maddie leaned closer to Ranger, her voice barely audible to anyone but him. "It's okay. I'm here. You don't have to do this alone." The dog's ears flicked, his muscles relaxing slightly, his head resting more fully against her shoulder. The air in the courtroom thickened with an almost tangible tension. It wasn't just the fear or anticipation. It was the sense that something monumental was about to unfold. Then Maddie did something even more surprising. She stood slowly, keeping her hands on Ranger, and turned her gaze toward Officer Dawkins. "You didn't see it, did you?" she said quietly but firmly. "You didn't see how scared he was, how he tried to stop you?" Dawkins' face paled. The officer's composure began to crack, a visible tremor running through his hands. Ranger shifted slightly, his stance protective, his gaze unwavering. The courtroom held its collective breath. The judge's voice broke through the tension. "Miss Holt, are you certain about what you are saying?" Maddie nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Your Honor, I saw it. I know what happened." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor adjusted her glasses, scribbling furiously in her notebook. The defense attorney's mouth opened and closed, clearly struggling for words. Everyone was caught in the gravity of the moment. Outside the courtroom, the town of Ridge was beginning to feel the impact. Social media feeds lit up with clips of Maddie speaking to Ranger. "Girl talks to police dog in court," one post read. "You have to see this," said another. Within minutes, hashtags like Maddie vs Ranger and Truth from the Youngest Witness were trending nationwide. People debated, praised, and questioned, but all eyes were on the small girl who had captured a trained K-9's attention and the entire courtroom's focus. Inside, Maddie continued, her voice gaining strength. "Ranger was trying to protect everyone, including him. He knows the truth, and now he's telling us." Ranger whined softly, a sound that resonated through the courtroom like a human sigh. It was almost mournful, a plea, a signal of both fear and loyalty. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. He had never seen a K-9 behave like this, let alone in front of a child. Karen Holt's hand trembled as she clutched her coat. She had taught Maddie to be brave, yes, but she hadn't prepared her for the sheer magnitude of what her daughter was doing. Maddie wasn't just speaking. She was commanding attention, empathy, and respect from a dog trained for obedience and decades of law enforcement. The gallery leaned in as Maddie spoke. "He tried to stop the officer from hurting anyone that night. I saw it happen, and now he wants everyone to know the truth." Ranger shifted again, his massive paw brushing against Maddie's leg. It was a silent gesture, one that conveyed trust, fear, and the weight of the night's events. The audience, captivated, felt the intensity in the room surge. Officer Dawkins stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. A child cannot dictate how a police dog behaves." Ranger growled sharply, the warning unmistakable. The officer froze, as if the dog's gaze could pierce through him, and the courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. Maddie's gaze didn't waver. She looked directly at Dawkins. "He doesn't want to hurt anyone, he just wants you to stop." The gallery gasped again. Reporters whispered excitedly to each other, their fingers flying across keyboards. Cameras flashed. Every second stretched, every heartbeat amplified. The judge leaned back, taking a moment to absorb the scene. Years in the courtroom had taught him to anticipate testimony, to weigh evidence, to consider human witnesses. But he had never encountered a child commanding a K-9's attention, revealing truths that were invisible to adult eyes. He tapped the gavel lightly. "Let the record show this courtroom is witnessing something extraordinary. Proceed, Miss Holt." Maddie knelt once more, bringing her face close to Ranger. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now, you can tell them." The dog's ears flicked, his growl softened, and for the first time in years, Ranger seemed to fully trust someone other than his handler. The courtroom watched in awe. Then Maddie spoke louder, addressing the entire room. "He remembers what happened. He tried to protect everyone, and he wants them to know the truth. He wants everyone to be safe." The murmurs turned into a low hum of disbelief and awe. Even Dawkins looked shaken. His grip on the leash faltered. Ranger shifted slightly, leaning closer to Maddie, clearly acknowledging her words over the officer's commands. The tension in the courtroom was electric. Every person present felt it, the realization that the smallest witness in the room had the largest impact, and everyone understood deep down that the trial was about to change forever. The courtroom had grown unbearably silent. Every eye followed Maddie Holt, the 10-year-old at the center of an unprecedented scene. A child standing boldly before a police officer, a courtroom, and a trained K-9, claiming to know the truth of a night that had divided the town of Red Ridge. Ranger's massive head rested lightly against her shoulder, ears flicking at every whisper, every movement, every flicker of tension in the room. The dog's presence amplified the weight of Maddie's words. The small girl and the mighty animal together seemed to form a force no one dared challenge. Maddie took a deep breath. Her fingers clenched the edge of the witness stand, knuckles white. "I was there that night," she said softly. "I didn't want anyone to see me, so I hid behind the vending machines at the gas station. I was scared, but I saw everything." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some leaned forward, mouths agape. Others exchanged uneasy glances. The defense attorney, Martin Raines, slammed his briefcase lightly against the bench. "Objection," leading the witness. The judge waved him off, his eyes never leaving Maddie. "Overruled. Continue, Miss Holt." Maddie nodded, her voice trembling only slightly. "It was late. The streets were empty. I saw the officer, he was arguing with the boy. They were shouting, and then things got worse." She paused, swallowing hard. Her eyes flicked to Ranger, who lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring, growling softly, not in aggression but in recognition. He remembered. "I saw the officer swing his arm," Maddie continued, "and Ranger jumped in front of him. He barked loudly, frantically. He tried to stop him." The gallery gasped. Even the seasoned attorneys exchanged glances, unsure whether to react with disbelief, shock, or awe. The prosecutors scribbled notes furiously, while reporters whispered into microphones, their cameras capturing every second. Ranger shifted slightly, his massive paw pressing firmly against the floor as though emphasizing Maddie's words. He wasn't just a witness, he was a participant. Maddie's small voice rose. He didn't want to hurt anyone, he was scared. He kept trying to stop the officer, but he didn't listen. And the boy, he didn't know what to do. He froze. A gasp erupted from the gallery. The defense attorney jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is speculation," she. The judge slammed his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Raines. Miss Holt is describing her direct observations. Proceed." Maddie nodded, feeling a small surge of confidence. "I tried to move closer to help, but I was too small. I couldn't do anything. I just watched. And Ranger," her voice caught. "Ranger kept barking, trying to stop him. He was brave, even though he was scared too." Officer Dawkins shifted in his seat, his face pale. He had trained Ranger for years. He had drilled obedience, discipline, and loyalty into the dog. And yet here was Ranger defying him, siding with a child who was not even officially a witness until today. Every muscle in Dawkins' body screamed unease. He gripped the leash tightly, but Ranger's eyes never left Maddie. Corinne Holt's hands shook in her lap. She wanted to jump up to cheer her daughter on, to cry, but she remained frozen. She had always known Maddie was brave, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. Her daughter was not just testifying, she was commanding attention, revealing truths that adults had overlooked. Maddie took another shaky breath. The officer didn't see Ranger trying to protect anyone. He didn't notice the boy freeze. He didn't notice that Ranger was warning him that he didn't want anyone to get hurt. But I saw it. I saw everything. And I think Ranger wants everyone to know the truth too. Ranger's low growl deepened, almost in agreement. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He had presided over thousands of cases, but he had never seen an animal behave like this in court. The tension was palpable, electric, as if the room itself were holding its breath. The prosecutor, Linda Carrington, adjusted her glasses and leaned in, her voice calm but urgent. "Miss Holt, can you tell us exactly what happened after Ranger tried to stop him?" Maddie nodded. "I saw the officer swing again. Ranger lunged between them. He didn't bite, he didn't attack. He just blocked him, tried to make him stop. But the officer didn't listen. Ranger was scared. He tried to bark louder to warn him. And then—" Her voice faltered. The memory of that night clawed at her chest. She swallowed, fighting back tears. "Then the officer hit him. Ranger tried to pull him back, but the officer didn't care. He didn't see anyone but his anger. He didn't see what was happening. Ranger was trying to save everyone. And I think he knew the officer wouldn't listen unless someone else could explain it." The courtroom was silent. The murmurs had vanished. All eyes were on Maddie, on Ranger, on the undeniable bond between them. Even Officer Dawkins' lips parted slightly, as though he wanted to deny it but couldn't. Ranger's growl softened again, but his eyes were intense, unwavering, as if pleading for recognition, for justice, for someone to finally see the truth. Corinne Holt whispered under her breath, barely audible, "My God." The defense attorney's hands shook slightly as he flipped through his notes, desperate to regain control. "Your Honor, this is absurd. She's a child, she—" The judge slammed his gavel again. "Enough, Mr. Raines. This witness is testifying under oath. Let her continue." Maddie straightened her small frame, drawing a shaky breath. She looked directly at Officer Dawkins. "You didn't see him try to help. You didn't see how he tried to protect the boy. Ranger remembers. He remembers everything." Ranger's ears flicked, his paw shifted, and for the first time he barked, short, sharp, and urgent. Not at Maddie, not at the gallery, but at Dawkins. The sound resonated through the courtroom like a bell of warning. The officer froze, his face ashen. The judge leaned forward, gripping the edge of his bench. Order, silence in the courtroom. His eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of wonder. He had seen dogs in courtrooms before, but none had ever acted as a witness, as a communicator, as a participant in a human child's testimony. Maddie's voice trembled but did not break. He tried to stop him. He tried to protect everyone. And no one noticed except me. I saw everything. Ranger wants them to know the truth. A reporter in the back whispered into his microphone. This is incredible. She's recounting the night of the incident. She's telling the truth no one else can see." The courtroom hung on her words, rapt. Everyone understood that what Maddie was saying carried weight beyond her age, beyond the law. beyond the limits of ordinary human comprehension. The child and the dog together had created a force of truth that no one could ignore. Corinne Holt's chest tightened with both fear and pride. Her daughter had been brave enough to witness the darkness of that night, and now she was brave enough to confront it head-on. She pressed her hands together, silently praying that Maddie and Ranger would be safe, that the truth would finally be recognized. Maddie took another deep breath. Ranger tried to stop him, he tried to protect the boy, and he tried to protect the officer too, but the officer didn't listen. He didn't see what was happening. I saw it. And now you all have to see it too. Ranger whined softly, his eyes locking onto Maddie's with unwavering trust. It was a moment so pure, so emotionally charged, that the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for the next revelation. And then, as if in agreement, Ranger shifted his massive body slightly, moving closer to the evidence table. The gallery gasped again. Everyone sensed it. The dog was not just responding to Maddie. He was pointing, signaling, trying to reveal something no human had noticed. The judge leaned forward, his gavel forgotten. "What is he doing?" he whispered. Maddie's eyes followed Ranger's movement. "He wants them to see the body camera, the one the officer said didn't work." A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. The officer's hands trembled. The defense attorney's mouth went dry. Ranger, the trained K-9, had just indicated the one piece of evidence that could unravel the entire case. The judge's eyes widened. "Bring it forward immediately," he ordered, "and let the record show the K-9 has indicated the evidence." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled for cameras. Deputies rushed to comply. Officer Dawkins sank into his chair, pale and defeated, his leash slack in his trembling hands. Maddie knelt beside Ranger, her small hand stroking his fur. "It's okay," she whispered. "We'll make them see." For the first time that day, the dog rested his head fully against her shoulder, calm and trusting. Together, they had become a force no one could ignore. And everyone in the courtroom knew one thing. The night of the incident was about to be revealed in full, and nothing would ever be the same again. The courtroom's chaos had barely subsided when the bailiff motioned for everyone to remain seated. Cameras flashed, capturing Maddie kneeling beside Ranger as the dog's massive head rested against her shoulder. Outside, the town of Reed Ridge buzzed like a storm about to break. The courthouse steps were packed with onlookers, reporters, and residents desperate for updates. The hashtags Maddie vs. Ranger and Justice for Ranger were trending nationally. The small town suddenly, a focal point of a story that seemed impossible, yet entirely real. Inside, the tension thickened. Officer Trent Dawkins slumped in his chair, the leash slipping from his trembling fingers. He was a decorated officer, respected, or at least feared by colleagues and townspeople alike. And yet here he was, powerless before the bond between a 10-year-old girl and his K-9. His mind raced, frantically calculating damage control, every instinct screaming that he had to regain control, but nothing he tried worked. Ranger's eyes never left Maddie. Corinne Holt, seated in the front row, covered her mouth, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would give her away. She had raised Maddie to be courageous, yes, but she had never imagined the small girl would hold the attention of an entire courtroom, and a dog trained for obedience, in this way. The judge leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his face a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. "Miss Holt," he said slowly, "it seems that Ranger is reacting to your words. You claim he witnessed the events of that night. Are you certain of this?" Maddie nodded firmly, her small shoulders straight despite the weight of the room. "Yes, Your Honor, I know what happened. Ranger tried to stop him. I saw it, and I think he remembers it too." Before the judge could respond, a female officer stepped quietly into the room. She had remained in the background until now, watching Maddie's testimony unfold. Her uniform was neat, but her eyes were wide, revealing a mixture of shock and concern. "Maddie," the officer whispered, kneeling to her level, "I need to talk to you." Karen Holt tensed. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "She's someone who knows the truth about Ranger," Maddie said softly, standing and holding the dog close. The officer's voice lowered further, urgent and conspiratorial. "Maddie, you weren't supposed to know this. Ranger wasn't just any police dog. He was brought to your school once. You played with him, didn't you?" Maddie nodded slowly. "I remember. He liked everyone except Officer Dawkins. He didn't like him." The officer's eyes widened. "Yes, that's exactly it. Dawkins, he mistreated Ranger. He pulled too hard on his collar one day and Ranger has never trusted him since. He likes you because you understand him. You're the only one who ever really did." Maddie's hand trembled slightly as she stroked Ranger's fur. "I saw it," she whispered. "I saw him hurt Ranger." The officer's face went pale. "Exactly. That's why he reacted tonight the way he did. He's trying to tell everyone you're the only one who can explain it." Karen Holt's heart lurched. Fear, pride, and relief crashed over her in waves. Her daughter had not only been brave enough to witness the events of that night, she had also connected with the only creature who could testify in its own way about the truth. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, calling the room to attention. "Miss Holt," he said, "if you have information that could impact the case, you may present it now." Maddie glanced at Ranger, who gave a low, approving whine, almost as if saying, "It's time." She took a deep breath and began recounting the story she had held inside for months. "I know Ranger tried to stop the officer," Maddie said, her voice steady. "But there's more. He wasn't just trying to protect the boy, he was trying to protect everyone. He barked, he lunged, and he refused to obey the officer's commands because he knew what was happening wasn't right. And he wanted someone to see it, someone who would understand. That's why I'm here." The gallery gasped again. Reporters scribbled notes frantically. Cameras flashed. Even the seasoned prosecutors and defense attorneys looked shocked. Nothing in their years of legal experience had prepared them for testimony delivered by a child and validated by a K-9's behavior. Officer Dawkins' face was pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He gripped the leash desperately, trying to regain control, but Ranger shifted slightly, pressing closer to Maddie, clearly siding with the child over his handler. The female officer who had spoken to Maddie stepped forward again. "Your Honor, if I may," she said, her voice quiet but commanding, "there is additional evidence concerning Ranger's training and his handler's conduct. This hasn't been disclosed yet, and it could affect the integrity of the case." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Go on." She took a deep breath. "Ranger has a documented history of obedience and reliability. He has never defied commands, except under specific circumstances. During an internal review, it was noted that Officer Dawkins had been excessively forceful with Ranger on multiple occasions. The dog's refusal to obey today is consistent with his previous reactions to mistreatment." The courtroom murmured in shock. Maddie's testimony suddenly aligned with documented evidence. The child and the dog together had painted a picture no one could deny. Karen Holt's hands shook as she clutched her coat. Her daughter's bravery was now intertwined with indisputable proof. The weight of months of tension, fear, and uncertainty pressed down on her, but for the first time, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. Maddie knelt beside Ranger once more, her voice soft but clear. "He remembers everything," she said, "and he tried to protect everyone that night, even Officer Dawkins. He doesn't trust him anymore, but I do, I understand him." Ranger whined softly in agreement, resting his head fully against her shoulder. The courtroom was spellbound. Even the judge leaned forward, his gavel momentarily forgotten. The female officer continued, addressing the judge. "There are logs, photographs, and prior reports that corroborate what Miss Holt is saying. If the court allows, we can retrieve the body camera footage from that night. It may be incomplete, but it contains critical evidence of the officer's actions and Ranger's intervention." A stunned hush swept the room. Officer Dawkins' hands trembled as he realized the weight of what was about to be revealed. His carefully constructed narrative, his authority, his control, all were unraveling before the eyes of a 10-year-old girl and the dog he had trained for years. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. "Prepare the footage immediately. The court will review all available evidence before proceeding further." Maddie held Ranger close, whispering softly, "It's okay, Ranger, you're safe. They'll see the truth now." The dog pressed his massive head against her, a silent acknowledgement of trust and gratitude. The gallery watched in awe, captivated by the unusual alliance between child and canine. For the first time, it was clear. The story was no longer just about the events of that night. It was about loyalty, courage, and the undeniable bond between Maddie and Ranger. As the bailiffs rushed to gather the body camera evidence, Maddie's eyes scanned the courtroom. Every face told a different story: shock, disbelief, awe, and a dawning realization that the narrative of the night was shifting dramatically. The child who had been underestimated by everyone, including the seasoned law enforcement officers, was now guiding the court toward the truth. Ranger whined again, low and insistent, his eyes flicking to Officer Dawkins, then back to Maddie. It was a warning, a plea, a message carried in fur and instinct. The truth must come out. Corinne Holt pressed her hands to her chest, tears threatening to spill. She had always believed in her daughter, but this was something beyond belief. Maddie had not only survived the chaos of that night, she had illuminated it, revealing hidden truths that no adult had been able to convey. And as the court prepared to review the evidence, the tension in the room reached a fever pitch. The story Maddie and Ranger were about to reveal would change everything. It was no longer just a trial. It was a reckoning. The judge's voice cut through the heavy silence. "The court will reconvene after the evidence is presented, and we will hear from this young witness and her K-9 companion. This trial will never be the same again." Outside the courthouse, the town of Ridge buzzed with anticipation. Reporters spoke rapidly into their microphones, and the hashtags were trending nationwide. Inside, every person in the gallery, every officer, every lawyer, every reporter knew one thing: the next moments would reveal the true story of that night, and nothing would ever be the same again. Maddie hugged Ranger tightly, whispering, "It's okay, we're ready." Ranger nuzzled her, calm but alert, as if acknowledging that the battle for truth was far from over, but that they would face it together. And somewhere deep in Officer Dawkins' mind, a chilling realization had taken hold. The dog he had trained for obedience had chosen a new master, and that master was a 10-year-old girl who would not be silenced. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Maddie Holt knelt beside Ranger, who rested his massive head gently on her shoulder, and the room's tension was almost unbearable. The judge's gavel had rung moments ago, commanding attention, but the real authority in the room now seemed to belong to the unlikeliest pair: a 10-year-old girl and a police K-9. Everyone, officers, lawyers, reporters, and townspeople, knew that the next moments would change everything. Bailiffs hustled toward the evidence table, carrying a black, weathered box that contained the long-contested body camera footage. The camera, Dawkins had claimed, had malfunctioned during the incident, but Maddie's eyes followed Ranger as he shifted slightly, his massive paws pressing into the floor, tail stiff and alert. The dog was pointing, deliberately, toward the evidence. Every person in the room could see it. Ranger wasn't just present. He was directing attention, guiding the court toward a truth no one had acknowledged before. The judge leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. "Bring the camera forward," he ordered. "Let the record show that the K-9 has indicated a specific piece of evidence. It shall now be reviewed." Officer Dawkins' jaw tightened. He had trained Ranger for years. Every command, every subtle gesture, every ounce of discipline had been drilled into the dog. And yet here he was, watching as the dog defied his authority, siding with a child in a way that no human could challenge. His mind raced, trying to process the impossibility of the moment. The bailiffs carefully placed the evidence on the table, and the court technician began the process of uploading the footage. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale blue glow across the tense faces of the courtroom. Maddie's small hand brushed Ranger's fur. "It's okay," she whispered. "They'll see." The footage began, grainy but clear enough to reveal the events of that night. The audio crackled, and immediately Ranger's barking pierced through the courtroom speakers. It wasn't aggressive, no growls, no snapping, but a repeated, insistent warning. Every ear in the room perked up. People shifted in their seats, leaning closer. Even the most skeptical reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. Maddie whispered almost to herself, "He's trying to stop him. Listen." The officer on the footage, Dawkins, was arguing with the teenager outside the gas station. The argument escalated quickly, voices raised, shadows stretching under the dim streetlights. Then, unmistakably, Ranger lunged between them. The dog barked, snapping at the air, his body tense and protective. The audio captured Dawkins shouting commands, attempting to regain control. "Down, Ranger, sit, stop it." The courtroom gasped. The growls, the barking, and the audio of Dawkins' anger were enough to make the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stand on end. Maddie's eyes welled with tears. He tried to stop him. He tried to protect him too. Ranger in the courtroom whined softly, pressing his head closer to Maddie, as if emphasizing her words. The gallery was silent now, save for the hum of the projector and the occasional sniffle of a shocked observer. Even the judge seemed to be holding his breath, his eyes glued to the screen. Then the footage revealed something no one expected. Officer Dawkins raised his arm swift, uncontrolled, and the boy flinched. Ranger reacted instantly, lunging between them again, his bark urgent, protective, almost pleading. Every movement was precise, instinctive, and deliberate. Ranger wasn't attacking. He was defending, signaling, intervening in a way that no human could replicate. The prosecutor, Linda Carrington, leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, this is undeniable. The dog's intervention is clear. He is acting to prevent harm." The defense attorney, Martin Raines, flailed helplessly. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. A dog cannot testify, this is." The judge slammed his gavel. "Order, the evidence speaks for itself. Miss Holt, continue." Maddie straightened, her small hand still resting on Ranger. He tried to stop him. He tried to make him listen, but the officer he didn't hear. Ranger was scared, he barked, he moved, he protected everyone, and no one noticed except me. The murmurs through the courtroom were audible now. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked, some audience members gasped. The footage continued, showing the officer's attempts to force Ranger away to regain control, while Ranger's body language screamed defiance, not aggression but warning, protection, and fear. Corinne Holt's hands shook in her lap. She pressed them together, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Her daughter had not only witnessed the events of that night, she had validated them in front of the only witness capable of communicating them without words. Maddie's voice rose slightly, steady despite the weight of the moment. He wasn't trying to be bad. He was trying to save everyone, even the officer. He didn't want anyone hurt. He was just doing his job the right way. Ranger in the courtroom shifted, pawing lightly at the floor, pressing closer to Maddie. His low whine echoed through the hall, a sound that seemed to reinforce every word the girl had spoken. The judge's hand hovered over the gavel, but he did not strike it. He was witnessing history. The child's testimony, combined with Ranger's behavior and the video evidence, painted a story no human voice could fully convey alone. Then came the moment that would shake the courtroom even further. The footage, once grainy and incomplete, now revealed the officer's hand hitting the boy, a motion quick and forceful. Ranger lunged, placing his body between the two, barking with urgency. The audio captured a faint yelp, the boy frozen in fear. Gasps erupted across the room. Corinne Holt covered her mouth with both hands. Maddie's eyes widened, tears streaming, yet her voice remained steady. He tried to stop it, he tried to make him stop, but no one listened except me. Ranger let out a soft, almost mournful whine, pressing his head fully against Maddie. It was a sound that conveyed understanding, loyalty, and trust. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a moment where truth, bravery, and instinct converged. The judge finally spoke, his voice deliberate. The court will take a brief recess to review the footage fully and assess the evidence, but let the record show, this trial has reached a pivotal moment. Officer Dawkins sank into his chair, pale and defeated. For the first time in years, he faced the reality that he had lost control over Ranger, over the narrative, over the courtroom itself. The dog he had trained to obey without question had chosen truth over loyalty to him, siding instead with a child who had courage and empathy he could not understand. Outside, the townspeople of Ridge buzzed with anticipation. Reporters spoke rapidly into their microphones. Social media feeds exploded with updates, and the hashtags Maddie vs Ranger and Justice for Ranger spread like wildfire. The narrative of the night had shifted dramatically, and everyone knew that the next moments in the courtroom would determine not just the trial, but the future of those involved. Maddie whispered softly to Ranger, stroking his fur. "It's okay, they'll see the truth, they have to." Ranger pressed his head closer, alert but trusting, a silent acknowledgement that the next phase of the trial and the exposure of hidden truths would be faced together. The judge finally banged the gavel, calling the courtroom to order. The trial will resume shortly, but let it be clear, this child and this dog have provided testimony and evidence that cannot be ignored. The court will proceed with all due diligence. And in that tense, electric moment, every person in the courtroom, reporters, townspeople, lawyers, officers, understood one undeniable fact. Maddie and Ranger were no longer just witnesses. They were the truth, and the trial had reached a point from which there could be no turning back. The night of the incident was about to be revealed fully, and the courtroom and the town would never be the same again. The courtroom felt suspended in time. Maddie Holt stood beside Ranger, her small frame unwavering, her fingers buried in the dog's thick fur. Ranger's massive head rested lightly against her shoulder, his amber eyes alert and intelligent. The evidence had been reviewed, grainy, flickering footage, audio of barks and commands, and the undeniable proof of the night's events. Every person in the room, lawyers, officers, reporters, townspeople, knew that the truth was no longer speculation. It had been revealed piece by piece by a child and a dog. Officer Trent Dawkins sat slumped in his chair, white-knuckled hands gripping the leash that now seemed like a chain, a symbol of the control he had lost. Every instinct screamed at him to speak, to defend himself, to assert authority. But the room had shifted. Authority no longer rested with him. It rested with Maddie and Ranger. The judge, his expression unreadable, tapped the gavel lightly. The court has reviewed the footage and testimony presented. It is clear that Ranger's behavior during the incident was deliberate, protective, and beyond the officer's direct control. Miss Holt, you may continue your account of that night, and we will hear any additional evidence you wish to provide. Maddie's small hand gripped Ranger's fur tighter. "I know what happened," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly but carrying a gravity beyond her age. Ranger wasn't just trying to stop the officer. He was trying to protect everyone, and he wanted someone to see it. That's why I'm here. The prosecutor, Linda Carrington, leaned forward, voice measured but intense. "Miss Holt, please describe in detail what you witnessed after Ranger tried to intervene." Maddie took a deep breath. The officer, he swung again at the boy. Ranger barked, lunged, and put himself between them. I saw the fear in Ranger's eyes. He wanted to make the officer stop, but he couldn't do it alone. The boy was frozen, and the officer didn't notice anything except his own anger. The courtroom gasped. Corinne Holt pressed her hands together, her knuckles white. She could feel every heartbeat, every tremor in her daughter's small frame. Maddie was recounting moments that were raw, painful, and undeniable. Ranger shifted slightly, pressing his head closer, his low growl underscoring Maddie's words. Every person in the room could feel the intensity radiating from the dog. This wasn't just a trained animal, it was a living witness, validating the child's testimony. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Holt, please continue. The court is listening carefully." Maddie's voice rose slightly, steady and unwavering. "I saw him hit the boy. Ranger barked and lunged, but the officer didn't stop. Ranger tried again and again. And then he cornered him, trying to make him see what was happening. He wanted to protect him. He wanted to protect everyone. And I think he knew someone had to be here to explain it, to show the truth. That's why I'm here." A low murmur ran through the courtroom. Even seasoned reporters leaned forward, cameras snapping, microphones capturing every moment. The gravity of the child's words was palpable. Officer Dawkins' face was pale, lips pressed tightly together. He had trained Ranger to obey, to follow commands without question. And yet, here was his K-9, siding with a child against him, acting with an instinctive moral compass that no human could dictate. The defense attorney, Martin Raines, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is absurd. A dog cannot testify, a child cannot provide evidence of intent. This is—" The judge slammed his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Raines. The witness is under oath. The court will allow all testimony. Miss Holt, continue." Maddie nodded, taking a small step back, allowing Ranger to move slightly forward. "I know Ranger remembers everything," she said. "He tried to stop the officer. He tried to make him listen. And no one noticed except me." The dog let out a soft whine, his eyes flicking toward Dawkins, then back to Maddie. Every movement, every gesture seemed deliberate, a communication of the night's events that words alone could not capture. Then Maddie did something extraordinary. She knelt slightly, bringing her face level with Ranger, and whispered, tell them what happened." Ranger shifted, pressing closer, and then, almost imperceptibly, tapped the leash with his paw, signaling toward Officer Dawkins' side of the courtroom. The gallery gasped. It was subtle but deliberate. Ranger was pointing toward the officer as if to indicate responsibility. Corinne Holt gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. Maddie's bravery, combined with Ranger's instinctive communication, had created a moment no one could ignore. The female officer who had previously spoken to Maddie stepped forward again, her voice firm. "Your Honor, there are internal reports and prior documented incidents that corroborate this behavior. Officer Dawkins has a history of excessive force, both toward suspects and toward Ranger. This is consistent with the dog's reactions during the incident." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Officer Dawkins' knuckles turned white as he gripped the leash. He had no defense. The evidence, the child's testimony, and the dog's behavior were all aligned against him. Maddie stood tall, her voice gaining strength. He didn't see Ranger trying to help. He didn't see the fear. He didn't see the boy freeze, but I did. And now everyone can see it. Ranger remembers. He tried to stop him. He tried to protect everyone, and he wants them to know the truth. The murmurs grew louder. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked, and social media feeds exploded with live updates. Outside, townspeople gathered, phones raised, capturing every moment. The story was no longer confined to the courtroom. It was spreading across the nation. Ranger shifted slightly, pressing his massive head fully against Maddie's shoulder. The dog's whine was soft but insistent, almost human in its intensity. Every person in the room could feel it. Ranger was confirming every word, reinforcing every claim, signaling the truth in a language that transcended words. The judge's gavel finally fell, but it wasn't to restore order. It was to punctuate a moment of profound realization. "Let the record show," he said, voice low and deliberate, that the witness has provided testimony corroborated by evidence, including the behavior of a police K-9. The court acknowledges the unprecedented nature of this testimony. This trial will continue with this understanding. Officer Dawkins sank into his chair, defeated, his face pale. The weight of the truth bore down on him. Ranger, the dog he had trained for obedience, had chosen a different path, siding with the child who had the courage to see clearly and speak honestly. Karen Holt's eyes filled with tears. She had always believed in her daughter's bravery, but seeing it manifest in this courtroom, witnessed and validated by a K-9, was beyond anything she could have imagined. Maddie whispered to Ranger, her voice steady yet soft. "It's okay. They see it now. They'll understand. You did everything you could." Ranger's massive head pressed closer, a silent acknowledgement of trust and gratitude. He had done his part. Maddie had done hers. Together, they had unveiled a truth that no human witness alone could have conveyed. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even the most skeptical members of the audience understood that the trial had reached a critical turning point. The events of that night were no longer disputed, and the bond between Maddie and Ranger had revealed a truth that could not be ignored. And then Maddie spoke the words that would stop the trial, not just in the courtroom but across the town, across the nation. "Ranger tried to save everyone," she said, her small voice carrying through the hushed room. "And now, I think it's time he's heard." The judge leaned forward, eyes widening. The room seemed to hang on her words. Every reporter, lawyer, officer, and observer waited, breathless, as the small girl and the K-9 prepared to change everything. Ranger let out a single, soft bark, almost like a punctuation mark. It was not aggression, not fear. It was acknowledgement. It was truth. And in that moment, the courtroom, the town of Ridge, and everyone watching knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The courtroom was electric with anticipation. Maddie Holt stood tall, tiny hands gripping Ranger's thick fur. The massive dog rested his head against her shoulder, eyes scanning the room as if aware that every gaze was fixed upon them. Cameras flashed, microphones recorded, and the air itself seemed heavy with expectation. The body camera footage had been reviewed, Ranger's actions had been observed, and every whisper of doubt had been silenced by the undeniable truth conveyed by a child and a dog. The judge leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of the bench. "Miss Holt, the court understands that Ranger has demonstrated behavior consistent with your testimony. If there is anything further, now is the time." Maddie took a deep breath, glancing at Ranger. The dog's eyes met hers, steady, intelligent, and unwavering. She drew courage from him, the bond they shared giving her a strength that seemed larger than her small frame. "Your Honor," Maddie began, her voice clear and unwavering. Ranger tried to stop him. He tried to protect everyone, including the officer, but he couldn't do it alone. And I think the officer didn't realize what was happening until now. I think he needs to see that Ranger was trying to help." The courtroom was silent. Even Officer Dawkins, defense attorney, seemed momentarily speechless. Ranger let out a low, soft whine, pressing his head closer to Maddie. Every person present could feel the depth of the connection between them, the unspoken communication, the shared understanding, the courage of both child and K-9. The judge's voice was quiet but intense. "Very well, Miss Holt, proceed." Maddie knelt slightly, placing her hands firmly on Ranger's massive head. "Ranger remembers everything that night," she whispered, almost to the dog alone. "He tried to stop the officer. He tried to protect the boy, and he tried to protect you too." Ranger's ears flicked, his eyes locking onto Dawkins with a silent intensity. The dog shifted his paw slightly, almost imperceptibly pointing toward the officer, signaling the accountability that humans were so slow to acknowledge. Every person in the courtroom held their breath. Then Maddie spoke louder, addressing the court. "He did his job the best way he knew how, and I think the truth can finally be seen by everyone." The judge nodded slowly, absorbing the scene unfolding before him. Let the record show this child and this K-9 have provided testimony that is unprecedented. The court will now proceed with the final review of all evidence, including the body camera footage, internal reports, and witness statements. This trial will reach its conclusion based on the facts presented here today. The bailiffs moved swiftly, placing the evidence back on the table for the final review. The footage played again, this time with the courtroom fully silent, every detail observed in its entirety. Ranger barked and lunged in the video, but it was clear he was never aggressive. He was protective. He was trying to intervene to prevent harm, and every movement aligned perfectly with Maddie's testimony. Karen Holt's hands shook as tears ran down her face. She glanced at her daughter, awed by her bravery and her ability to communicate the truth, validated in a way no one else could have. Maddie's courage had transcended age, defied expectations, and transformed a courtroom into a place where justice was not just a word but a living, breathing reality. The prosecutor, Linda Carrington, stood. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of finality. Your Honor, based on the testimony of Miss Holt, corroborated by Ranger's behavior and the body camera evidence, it is clear that Officer Dawkins' actions were reckless and endangered both the suspect and the K-9. We recommend full accountability and appropriate disciplinary action. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously, phones recorded, and whispers of disbelief and awe rippled through the room. Even the defense attorney seemed momentarily defeated, struggling to find words. Officer Dawkins' hands trembled on the table. The leash lay slack in front of him, Ranger's massive presence beside Maddie a constant reminder that the dog's loyalty had shifted, that the truth could not be ignored, and that his carefully maintained authority had crumbled under the force of undeniable evidence. Maddie's voice rose, steady and commanding. He didn't want anyone hurt. Ranger tried to protect everyone, even him. And now everyone can see it. The judge's gavel fell, lightly but with emphasis, calling for silence. Let the record show, the court acknowledges the bravery, insight, and testimony of Miss Maddie Holt and the K-9 Ranger. Their actions have revealed facts that were previously overlooked or misrepresented. The evidence is clear. The court recognizes the need for accountability and justice. Ranger let out a soft whine, pressing his head fully against Maddie. The courtroom seemed to exhale as one. Every observer understood the profound significance of what they had witnessed. This was more than a trial. It was a revelation of courage, empathy, and the extraordinary bond between a child and a dog. Karen Holt's chest heaved with relief and pride. She had known her daughter was brave, but this was beyond belief. Maddie had stood alone in a room full of adults, facing authority, fear, and intimidation, yet she had spoken truth with clarity, conviction, and compassion. And Ranger had supported her every step of the way, his instincts guiding her words and validating her observations. The judge leaned forward, eyes glinting with solemn respect. Miss Holt, Ranger, you have demonstrated a remarkable level of courage and integrity. The court is adjourned for deliberation on the officer's conduct and appropriate proceedings. This courtroom and this town has witnessed something extraordinary today. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted. People cheered, some wept, and reporters raced to broadcast the story. Phones captured videos, social media exploded, and the hashtags Maddie vs. Ranger and Justice Through Courage spread across the nation. Red Ridge would never be the same. Inside, Maddie hugged Ranger tightly. "We did it," she whispered. The dog pressed back, calm but alert, as if acknowledging her courage and their shared triumph. Karen Holt stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, and hugged her daughter. "You were incredible," she said softly. "I'm so proud of you." Maddie smiled, brushing her hair back and looking down at Ranger. "We did it together," she said. "He helped me. I just had to listen." Ranger let out a low, contented whine. He had not only saved the boy that night, He had saved the truth itself. He had ensured that justice would be seen, felt, and acknowledged. Officer Dawkins was led quietly from the courtroom. He would face the consequences, but no words could undo the revelation of that night. The bond between Maddie and Ranger had transcended authority, fear, and expectation. It had reshaped the narrative entirely. As the courthouse emptied, the judge lingered, watching the girl and the dog walk out together, small and mighty, fearless and resolute. In his decades of presiding over the law, he had never witnessed such clarity of truth, such courage, and such an extraordinary witness, one that could speak not with words alone but with loyalty, instinct, and trust. Maddie stepped onto the courthouse steps, Ranger at her side. The crowd erupted in cheers again, journalists raising microphones and phones capturing every moment. Cameras flashed. The story of courage, empathy, and truth had gone viral. It would be told for years to come. Maddie looked down at Ranger, her tiny hand resting on his massive head. "We showed them," she whispered. Ranger nuzzled her gently, a silent affirmation that together they had changed everything. And for the first time since that fateful night, the world seemed to understand. Bravery doesn't always come in the form of a hero in a uniform. Sometimes it comes in the heart of a child, and in the unwavering loyalty of a dog who refuses to let the truth be silenced. As they walked down the steps, the crowd parted, whispers of awe and admiration echoing behind them, the sun shining down on the small girl and the massive K9 who had rewritten justice in Ridge. For Maddie and Ranger, the trial had ended. But their story, the story of courage, truth, and the unbreakable bond between a child and a dog, would live on forever. And the world would never forget the day a little girl confronted a police dog in court, and the truth stopped a trial.